Welcome to another exciting episode of In Depth and Out Loud with me, Dubbz. Today joining us, very excited, Arye, who is co-founder and managing director of Tilt, an influencer marketing agency. So if you've ever wanted to tap into influencer marketing, well, you are in for a treat, because today we're going to be talking all things influencer marketing and just seeing how the landscape is changing just in those terms. Arye, thank you so much for being here today.
Very good to be here. Thank you so much.
So just before we get into the nitty-gritties, I need to find out from you if you have a talent, hidden talent, or a quirky habit, something that will, surprise us.
A hidden talent. Other than that, I can eat an extensive amount of chocolate, which I think is a great talent. I can kind of extend my feet quite extensively like that, which I think is a little bit of a hidden talent.
No, it is.
It's not that hidden anymore.
Okay, well, isn't there anything else you want to tell me? Maybe Cliff Central?
What did you do there? I did. I was a digital broadcaster for a couple of years. When Cliff Central started, I doubled up as a creative director there. And I had a show there, which was a podcast as well. So if you trawl deep on Google, you can take a listen to what we used to get up to several years ago.
I will definitely do that. So you're quite the all-rounder. Fast forward to now, you are now a co-founder and managing director at Tilt. Tell us how that came about and how you started.
Yeah, so Tilt is about 7 years old. 7 years ago, I think the concept of influencer was quite fresh in a South African context. How I kind of stumbled into it was that working at Cliff Central and then later Touch Central and Touch HD, there were some sort of really strong personalities on those platforms that had sort of acquired quite strong social media followings. And we found that was an additional way that a brand could amplify their message through the likes of some of those personalities. 7 years ago, influencer wasn't really a thing. I think everyone was learning what it meant to tweet, what it meant to post on Instagram, what Facebook was and how it would change the world, specifically in our context. But then the penny sort of has started to drop in the past several years around the context that, someone has 100 followers and they can post something and say something. And naturally, because everything revolves around advertising in some way, shape or form, could they be speaking about a brand to those 100 people? So influencer marketing, by the way, is nothing new. Advertising in its roots was kind of word of mouth. In the 60s and 70s, brands realized that they could buy space in which to speak. They could become an advert, they could buy a billboard, etc. But, many years ago, you would have a great cup of coffee, you'd go home and say to your mom, wow, I had a great cup of coffee. And that's kind of word of mouth. And influencer marketing is actually just word of mouth. But now, instead of just being able to tell your mom by virtue of your 100 Facebook friends, you can tell 100 people. So that's how it kind of began, and obviously it's gone through several iterations, and now it's become quite a cluttered space, and the testament to that is probably just opening Instagram right now.
I was just about to say to you that also as a consumer, if I want to go for a brand, you definitely want to go for word of mouth. So influencer marketing is kind of like that, because you get somebody that you've seen on a TV show or somebody famous, and they're telling you that this product is absolutely amazing. And if I see that, I get excited and I definitely want to try it because they've told me that it's amazing. So that's quite interesting. But I think you and I can agree that influencer marketing has become the beacon of companies, I think, nowadays. So how does influencer marketing change how companies promote themselves, would you say?
Yeah, I think there's several things that we can classify as sciences, right? We know that in the context of a human body, if you do X, you get Y result. If you take this medication, you get that result. The science of how to sway a consumer and get somebody to buy something is a sort of combination of logic and emotion. And emotion is a very difficult thing to kind of put a science to. So influencers, I think, play an incredible role in swaying a consumer to make a decision, but it's not the singular thing. When you are at a grocery store and you're deciding which biscuit to buy, your entire life has almost led up to that decision. You could have seen a great ad for that biscuit when you were 6 years old. Your mom could have said to you, this is how you celebrate by eating this biscuit when you were 12 years old. And then an influencer could have said something about it on Instagram a couple of seconds before. So certainly in terms of swaying consumers, there are millions of nuanced ways in which to do so. The concept of influencers, which is somebody speaking about a brand and you holding some sort of esteem towards that person and therefore taking that recommendation quite seriously, down to the extent that it influences you in the supermarket. There is a lot of value to it. It's not the only thing, but certainly what we see in terms of how people are making decisions, influencer marketing has become quite a strong sway point. Is it more effective than a TV ad, a radio ad, or a billboard? There is no actual apparent answer that anybody can own, but certainly there are scenarios and case studies that would suggest that it holds a lot of power to sway a consumer.
So how can influencers genuinely connect with brands and their audiences?
Yeah, so there's two sides. There's obviously the brand, and then there's the influencer. And it's actually a little bit of dating that has to happen between the two,
100%.
right? You stand for something, I stand for something. How do we kind of bring this together in some form of union? So influencers can absolutely reach out to brands. We find that the best is when it almost feels like looking at the influencer, it would be an immediate fit that they would be speaking about a product. So, for example, if I'm an influencer and I've just recently had a baby, and I'm posting about the challenges I'm going through in terms of like which products to use, etc., etc., there's a natural fit that a brand that does that would want to attach to that conversation.
Absolutely.
So I think the idea of like influencer as in someone holds up a tube of toothpaste, smiles and posts it on Instagram, that's probably like early infancy of influencer. The idea now is, we all engage with different products and brands all the time. As I'm sitting here, I've engaged with a clothing brand, a shoe brand, a watch brand, a glassware brand. We're engaging with brands all the time. So what is it that I can say about that brand on my platform that's going to feel quite authentic and that will be a recommendation almost to followers to then pursue those brands as well?
And I can imagine that it becomes more natural as well for the influencer. I mean, I'm not now going to go talk about coffee, okay? I don't drink coffee.
Yes.
Gives me heart palpitations.
Yes.
So I'd be very upset having to say something about that brand. But come to me and say, Dubbz, let's do a tea that has some ginger and lemon in it. 100%, I'm going to be a happy girl. And I think that's where then the authentic side will definitely pop in. But let me ask you about the nano and the micro influences, the differences, and if this has an impact on how you decide which influencer is correct to be used for a certain brand or a certain campaign?
Yeah, so I mean, because everyone wants to put it into almost like a box, a nano influencer is probably someone who's got sort of anywhere from sort of 0 to maybe 10,000 followers. Then we move to the micro guys, which are like 10 to 25,000. Then we move to the more macro guys, which could be like 100,000 plus. That micro space is a little bit interesting. I think people do want to put it into a box, but it is very nuanced to the brand. Some brands want to reach the whole of South Africa. Some brands, for example, a fly fishing brand, only wants to reach people that are buying things to do with fly fishing. And that's kind of how we start to differentiate which influencer is going to be right for something. It's based on how big the brand is and how big their market is. If you're talking about a lollipop, right? And they'll say to you, okay, cool, we're targeting this at people that are between the ages of 18 to 25. Then we kind of know to match an influencer to that. And some of them will be micro and some of them will be macro and some of them might be nano. It's all to do with kind of the audience that you're trying to connect with. Specifically though, what I will say about defining the success or the validity of an influencer through following is that it is a huge misconception to do so because we work quite extensively with engagement rates. So we find, and it does make sense, the second someone in South Africa wins a reality TV show, they have a really strong engagement rate because people are
Yeah.
engaging with them.
Yeah.
2 years later, they've still got the followers, but they no longer have the engagement because they haven't maintained that relevance. So engagement rates are really important on platforms like Instagram, and on platforms like TikTok, where it's aggregating almost more via content versus who you're following. What I would say is that the following is even less important. So on TikTok, you can have an amazing viral moment, gain 300,000 followers, and a year later, everyone's forgotten about you because you haven't had a moment after that. So those followers are almost redundant. This thing, I think, comes down to the content and the ability of that content to stop somebody in their tracks, that they say, wow, this is something that I really want to engage with. And the algorithms are designed to promote the best content. So the second it gets too contrived, which is very easy for influencer content to do, you kind of lose the value of that organic following.
That's interesting because I think right now in the digital space, everybody is obsessed with numbers and they have completely forgotten about engagement. So that's an interesting one. And I mean, if obviously somebody is interested in influencer marketing, they'll know that even if you nano, you can still get out there if there is engagement. Let's, in radio, because you did radio, right? Yes. You know that rule where they tell you that when you do a link, I think it's about 30 seconds or probably less that you have to grab the listener's attention. After that, they decide if they're actually going to stick around or, sorry, you're boring, I'm out of here. I want to now bring that into your world. How do you grab people's attention and, keep them interested?
I think it's largely to do with relatability, right? So, there's a great analogy around if I'm listening to an interview between, I don't know, Trevor Noah and Beyonce. Okay. And Beyonce's talking about the fact that she's bought a house for $100 million. Am I genuinely interested in Beyonce buying a house for $100 million, or am I benchmarking my ability to buy a $100 million house against hers? People are naturally self-interested. So, I mean, what you're speaking about is what's in it for the listener and how you kind of connect with them. I think influencer marketing is successful when you showcase to somebody what is in it for them. So if I had post-acne marks and I used a product and I got rid of it, and the person on the other end of the screen is a consumer who has post-acne marks, I'm going to watch that content because there's something in it for me because I have insecurity around these post-acne marks. So it's what is it that the person is grappling with in their own life, and how does the content in some way, shape or form solve for that will make it interesting
and relatable.
So this interview in and of itself is not going to be relevant to somebody who wants to become the next great engineer. The person who's watching this, you've already hooked them by saying this is to do with your potential career as an influencer. So it's what is it that content's going to do that's going to sort of draw you in, unless, of course, it's something to do with escapism. So there's no ways I can justify the Real Housewives being a trending topic on TikTok every week, but post-acne marks I can.
Okay, 100%. So with platforms like TikTok growing, and I must just say that I've also noticed that certain content works on different social medias, right? So something can work on Facebook, something can work on TikTok, and you post the same thing on Instagram and there's zero engagement, nobody says anything, but you take that same thing and you put it on TikTok, everybody is happy and everybody is coming to the party, right? So where should brands focus their influencer efforts, would you say?
Yeah, so to contextualize that, TV ads don't work on radio, radio ads don't work on TV, magazine print ads don't work in daily newspapers as well as they do. So it's nothing new that platforms and sort of consumption platforms are quite nuanced. In terms of where to focus attention, I mean, any marketer will say to you that you need to fish where the fish are. So platforms have quite specific sort of reach metrics and audience metrics in South Africa. So a lot of people will say maybe, cool, TikTok is positioned at a younger audience, which by the way, it's not because the insights around TikTok say that it's everybody. But you kind of have to say, if I'm targeting this vase at people who are 35 plus, where am I most likely to find them and the most amount of them? And if Facebook is the answer based on that data, then that's where you kind of go. If you're a massive brand, I think you kind of want your touch points to be everywhere. So I want to engage with someone when they're in the car on the radio. I want them to see the billboard of my brand while they're listening to me on the radio. And then when they get to work and open Instagram, I want them to see me. So brands kind of that need to serve everyone need to be everywhere. But if you are a brand that has a very specific niched audience, I think you can be more deliberate around the platform that you potentially decide to use. Facebook, you might go a little bit older. Instagram, you might go a little bit more mid. TikTok, you might go a little bit younger. But I would suggest doing sort of deep analysis around those audience profiles and breakdowns.
So what numbers do you look at to see if influencer campaigns are actually working? I know you've mentioned engagement, but what are the numbers that we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it's to give you the very commercial answer, it's sales. I mean, the best sort of campaign evaluations are when we can isolate that a brand, perhaps for the month of February, has only worked with influencers and that's all that they've done, and they've either seen an increase or decrease in sales. It's more difficult to isolate the actual outcome when a brand is doing TV, radio, influencers all at the same time. But the ultimate outcome of influencer marketing should be sales, and it should be sustained sales. So it should be, I've trialed this product and I now continue to use it. So driving a consumer from sort of pure awareness into trial, into purchase, into sustained purchase. But the answer is actually sales. I mean, people can speak about sort of brand sentiment and brand uplift and brand equity, but ultimately we operate in quite a commercial marketing context where if an influencer has spoken about a coffee, you want to see that that coffee is now moving more units of it at the local supermarket.
So I know that you've worked with quite big names. I know you've worked with DJ Zinhle. So how do you know which influencer to pick? And how do you know that this influencer is going to be absolutely amazing for this kind of campaign or to work with this kind of brand?
It's a combination of sort of emotion and then data analytics. You know, there is something to be said for naturally feeling like a brand could operate quite easily in someone's world. So you've spoken about the fact that you like ginger in your tea.
Yes.
If a brief comes across that there's this great new sort of ginger energy drink, immediately I would think, okay, cool.
Where's Dubbz?
Yeah, exactly.
You know? Exactly.
And then I can look at your sort of data insights and see, okay, cool. Dubbz's followers are based mainly in Johannesburg. That's actually the main area that we're trying to sell this ginger tea, and therefore Dubbz is going to be a great fit. So it is a bit of a combination. And I think it's also about sort of understanding very plausibly as a consumer, if I see this influencer speaking about this brand, is it going to be believable? And the truth is that 99% of influencer content we see is not believable. Because is an influencer genuinely going to talk about the power of a piece of toilet paper and how much they love that specific toilet paper brand naturally? It's very unlikely.
Yes.
And I think this is possibly what the evolution of influencer needs to look like, is a very real, honest conversation saying, does this naturally weave in? Should toilet paper be spoken about by an influencer, or should it just be a billboard or a radio ad? Does it just work better when the brand speaks about itself? Or is there a creative angle that a mom who's always speaking about budgeting and getting better deals would speak about a deal on toilet paper? So I think it's quite nuanced in terms of matching the influencer to the brand, and you have to be led by who is their audience and who am I as the brand, and it's a bit of a human and data conversation.
That is so amazing. But I think what I want to also just clarify, Tilt, you do not recruit influencers.
No, I can think of nothing worse.
So just break it down exactly where you come in here, what exactly it is that you do. Just now somebody runs into me and says, listen, Ari, can you know?
So we're the matchmaker.
Okay.
We facilitate the date between the brand and the influencer. The two of them date, they make some stuff together. We facilitate that process. So we help the brand select the influencer. We work with the influencer to create content that's still authentic to them, but still has some form of production value that aligns to the brand. And then we kind of try and roll it up into a creative idea. Remember, most campaigns will have more than just one influencer on them. So you kind of want a consistent golden creative thread throughout all of that,
Yes.
that the pieces feel quite similar and not too disjointed. So we build that creative strategy, we build the influencer recommendation, we help the influencers create the content, we then gather all the data and analytics after the campaign to see if it's been a success or not. But we really are, I hate to use the term middleman because I always think of insurance, which is not a passion
You're like a
point of
casting
mine.
director. Let's look at it from a casting
Yeah,
aspect.
we could go with that. We're the executive producer.
Okay, that's nicer. Fine. Executive producer it is. So do you have a database then? And are you able to suggest anyone that is not maybe on a database? So you know what? I think Dubbz is going to be great for this. I keep using myself.
Yes, that's good. Absolutely. So having worked with influencers for 7 years, we've built a database of different influencers that are really, really strong. What I think is important to note is that a lot of that database is also about what the person was like to work with. So, you know, unfortunately, we see it quite a bit where someone will gain an extensive amount of followers, they'll be super in demand, and then the actual experience of working with the person is not a great experience. And then even if they are amazing from a data perspective, we don't really want to work with someone who's not nice to work with.
Yeah.
So one thing I would say is very, very important is how you engage with the different stakeholders as an influencer. 100% you are the talent and you are lending your voice to this thing, but there does need to be a mutual respect between the brand, the agency,
100%.
and the influencer that builds a consistent relationship. Because there are more influencers than there are brands.
Yes, there's a lot of influencers right now. So how do we then make sure that brand and influencer are benefiting from the partnership?
Yeah, so from a brand perspective, it would be things like, is there an increase in sales? Is there an increase in brand love, in equity, in uplift? From an influencer perspective, one would hope that they would have a genuine appreciation for the product.
Yes.
And part of the agreement of them receiving the product as part of it would be something that they'd be quite interested in. It is a commercial transaction though, so the influencer does benefit financially from doing it. But you would hope that it runs deeper than that. You know, some of the best influencer partnerships that we've worked on have been where we've seen an influencer do a daily vlog and we've seen the product we're working on in that daily vlog just as something that's in their house. So the second we then go to them and say, hey, we've actually seen that you're already using this and speaking about this, we've got a new iteration of it coming out. That's when we see kind of the most amazing success in terms of the partnership. So I think a lot of people getting into it think, okay, cool, I'm going to get a massive amount of followers and then I'm going to hold this, take a selfie and I'm going to get paid.
Make a lot of money.
And it might have worked like a couple of years ago and it might still work today.
Yeah.
But we're looking at working with storytellers that can weave a brand authentically into the story that they're naturally telling on their social media platforms.
Okay, so within influencer marketing, do you have things such as, this is from a financial aspect, do you have things like a performance fee, a usage fee, or is it just standardized amount that you would give them, or sometimes, of course, you would compensate them via usage of the products, right, or the service?
So there's several different ways. I mean, I know that there are scenarios where an influencer will be fully aware of what the potential remuneration for a piece can be and then decide to opt into that or opt out.
Okay.
Our approach is typically to go to an influencer, say, what is your sort of costs around something, and almost to get them to quote us on it. And that quote can be broken up into sort of several different iterations. What is your cost to post a video on Instagram? What is your cost to post it on TikTok? If we have the brand repost that asset, is there additional fees? If the brand puts paid media behind that for 6 months, what would the usage fee be? If we say to you in the contract that you can't work with another brand for 6 months, is there an exclusivity fee because we're limiting your ability to work with other brands?
Yes.
So it can get sort of quite intricate, and it does, and it should. We're still very much at the beginning phase of kind of the legislation around influencer marketing. None of the influencer fees in a South African context have been formally standardized. There are benchmarks around what you might potentially pay someone, but to a large extent, we are influencer-led, and then we're very honest about the campaign. Because remember, influencer content can very often perform more successfully than the actual content the brand has made about themselves, which means they would want to invest in promoting the influencer content more than the other content, which means that there should be some form of remuneration.
Exactly. So can you give me examples of successful content ideas that you have used before?
Yeah, I can't speak too much to the different brands, but there are several brands, I think, where we've been able to see a direct uplift in sales. We've worked on, for instance, a toothpaste that has a very strong teeth whitening value proposition. There, we worked with the influencers months before the campaign went live to get them to actually use the product, show the before and afters in real time, then create the content, and then go live with the content and follow the journey. And there we saw, for instance, that the shelves at your local sort of pharmacy were completely empty by virtue of the influencer having done it.
Well done.
Well, I mean, it speaks to the product efficacy as well. And there's similar scenarios across different categories, but certainly it is something that can work.
So just before I let you go, one last question. What advice do you have for students who want to work as an influencer or even content creation?
Yeah, so I think the advice to someone who wants to be an influencer would be to be a content creator.
Okay.
And I think that we have to do a lot of work around someone wanting to just be an influencer. Some of the biggest influencers in the world are influencers by virtue of how great they are at their craft. So Mohamed Salah is an amazing football player. Therefore, if he says, use this soccer boot, you're going to use it. But he didn't start by saying, I'm just an influencer. That's not a thing. You should have something that you're really, really good at, or something that you are passionate about, or something that's intrinsic to you. And the influence will actually be a sub-product of that. So do not email us and say, I am an influencer, this is my rate card. Tell us what it is that you have achieved, accomplished. Are you a lawyer? Are you a doctor? Are you a content creator? What is it that you are doing in your daily life that has built an audience that believe and trust in you, that we can then try and align a brand to you?
Arye, thank you so much. Incredible insights. So there we go. If you are interested, if you wanted to tap into the influencer world, I think Arye has given you some gold tips there. All you need to do is find a passion, find something that you're really good at, and the influencer part of it will come. Stay creative and keep dreaming big. Until next time.